We're now going to go through several of the modules found in the standard library, beginning with the random module. That's because we've used this previously and we are familiar with it. So back over here in the documentation, here are all the modules in the standard library. You scroll down to this section, numeric and mathematical modules, you'll see random. Let's go ahead and click on it. So this is the library we're going to be using. So you can think of, when I say library and module, it is essentially the same thing. So sometimes I'll use both words, but really this is part of the standard library. You could say this is really like a book in the library, or really technically a module in the standard Python library. Okay, so there's a little bit of a description here about what this module does. And then if you scroll down, you'll see that it documents all of the objects in this module. So most of these are functions, and you can just read about each one. And if you scroll down, there's some more notes. So it gives you a lot more than what is available just in the help. So this is really a great, some great documentation. There is some code, kind of runs through some things over here. So you can get a lot by reading the documentation, something I highly recommend doing at some point. So that is the random module, and that's how you find out where the documentation is. Let's go ahead and use it. So we're going to begin with an import statement. That's how you get access to all of this extra functionality. Import and then the module name, like that. So what I want to show here is that random is just like any other variable name. It has a type. So a lot of times we don't think about this. Well, no, it's just like another variable. So it has type module. It's not really any different than, say, we create a variable a and assign it to 5. Well, a has type int. All right, great. So one thing I want to do now is to programmatically access all of the available names. So if you do random and then dot and press tab, you'll get a list of all of them like this. So this is basically all of the functionality that is available to you in this module. Another way to do this is with the dir function like this, and it'll actually show you the private or special methods as well, the ones that begin with a single underscore. So those are it. You can iterate through them and remove the ones that begin with an underscore. But just another way to kind of list out, show a glossary of everything that's available. I like to just use dot notation to quickly do it in the notebook. All right, so one thing before we progress further is I want to get you to thinking that modules are analogous to books, like in a regular library. So in a real world library, you have a bunch of books. You can think of modules, Python modules, as like a single book. So every book in the library, has a different subject, has different contents within it. So each Python module has its own contents that are separate from the other modules or the other books in the library. All right, so we're going to begin by calling the randint function. And to access all functionality with modules, you use dot notation. All right, so what we're going to do is write the name of the module, then press dot. You can press tab to get a list of all of the choices that you can see here. That's great. And I'm going to do randint. This is a function we are already familiar with. You can press shift tab tab and get the documentation over here. So say we want a number between 20 and 50. This will give you some random integer. We just executed a few times. You see that. Let's move on now. So to a function we have not seen, the Gauss function. So random.Gauss. This creates a random number from a Gaussian distribution. If you're not familiar with this, that's okay. This is an image of a Gaussian distribution. So this tells you, you look at this curve, where the data is most likely to be. So when you produce a random number from a Gaussian distribution, it's most likely going to be right around 0. That's where the highest, probability is. And it actually goes on to infinity, doesn't stop at 4 or -4, although getting a number past 4 is extraordinarily unlikely. So most of the data really is between -2 and 2, and then really centered around 0. So this is just a standard bell curve, if you've heard of that term before. So if we go back over here, you do have to provide it a mean and standard deviation. The mean is just where the center of this is at, and the standard deviation says how steep the slope is. So a larger standard deviation give you a larger kind of slope. A smaller one will give you a much steeper one. Okay, so for the standard Gaussian distribution, also called the standard normal, we'll say mu, which is the mean, is 0, and the standard deviation is 1. And it's okay, again, if you don't know this. The point is here that I want you to understand how to access the functionality in the modules. So that's with the dot notation. And then you just press Shift Tab Tab and see what arguments you can take into this function. All right, so here's just generating some random numbers that are mostly going to be between -3 and 3. Now let's move on to a different function, the random function. So this is going to look a little strange. We're going to be calling the random function in the random module. So they are named the same, but they are two totally different things. This is the module, this is the function, and this doesn't actually take any arguments. It returns a random float between 0 and 1. So like that, I'm just generating a bunch of random numbers. This is sort of like how the state New York has a city named New York. So the city is different than the state. This is the same thing. We have a function named random inside of the random module. All right, moving on to the uniform function. This is similar to the random function, but it generates a random float between two values. So we can say between 30 and 50. This will generate some uniformly. So there's no peaks. It's just can be anywhere. They're all equally likely between 30 and 50. So like this, just generating a bunch. So there are a lot more functions in the random module. I'm obviously not going to go through all of them, just through some of them so you get the idea of how to access them and then how to use them. All right, last thing here is that you cannot use any of these functions outside of the random module. So if we try to say uniform 30, 50, we're going to get a name error. So that means the variable name does not appear in our program. That's what Python considers a name error. You have to have the random module and use dot notation to access this. So just because you've imported random doesn't mean you have access to everything without random. You still need it with dot notation. All right, so that does it for the random module.